This session, we will try to understand what is declarative model and what is desired state. We'll try to understand what is the difference between the desired state and actual state of the Kubernetes when you run your application inside a Kubernetes, how the desired state and actual state is managed by Kubernetes, and if both the states are not equal, what happens? First thing, once you implement your application, you develop your application using .NET or Java, any language you use, and develop a microservice application. Once you build your application in any language, you have to build it using a Docker or any other technology, build it as an image. Once you build your application, .NET application, here I am taking example of .NET application. Once you build it, using a Docker. I'm taking example of Docker. Once you build, that application will be converted into image. That image we call it as a static container. Don't confuse. Once you build your .NET application, we are not running a container, but we are creating a container. That container we call it as a static container. We are not running a container, but we are created a static container. Once you created a static container, we will move it to any private repository. Here I am taking an example of Docker Hub. Your .NET application, you build application, create a static container and move that container to the Docker Hub. You can take any other private repositories, example JFrog. Once you move your Docker static container to Docker Hub, so your image is present inside a Docker Hub. So now up to this stage, we call it as a containerized application. Once you move your application, developed application, once you move, convert it to image and once you move it to the private repository, we call it as a, your application is containerized. We call it as a containerized application. So once your application is containerized, we have to hand it over to the Kubernetes. So how you will hand it over to the Kubernetes? First, we will create a manifest file. What is manifest file? It is an YAML file. We will declare the requirement, whatever the requirements we have for our applications, everything we will declare in a manifest file. Whenever we are declaring it in a YAML file, whenever we are declaring it in YAML file, that YAML file we call it as a declarative model. So in that YAML file, we will define how many copies your application should run. That means how many containers Kubernetes has to run. What is the port number your Kubernetes should take, and we will also define the network information also we will mention inside a YAML file. So whenever you are mentioning all the information inside an YAML file, that file we call it as a manifest file and we are calling it as a declarative model. So as the name indicates, declarative model means we are declaring the requirement inside a file. That is why we are calling it as a declarative model. I am repeating again. We are declaring the requirements inside an YAML file. That is why we are calling it as a declarative model. So once you are declared everything in YAML file, once you are written, you can use the Visual Studio Code or any tool to write this YAML file. Now you need to hand it over to the Kubernetes. How you will do? The first part, you have to post your declarative model YAML file to the API server, the Kubernetes API server using an HTTPS. The call it will go with a 443 port, that is an HTTPS, and your request with the manifest file when you are sending as an HTTPS to the API server, the Kubernetes will be doing authentication and authorization. So that will be sent to the your API through the Kubernetes API server. So in the previous session, we have already seen Kubernetes cluster. It will be having the worker node and the cluster node. So inside a cluster node, you will be having an API server. So we will be having an API server. We are sending our declarative model. We are declaring everything our requirement and giving it to the API server of the Kubernetes cluster. So now we have declared the requirement. Now what Kubernetes will do, it should run the task whatever we defined. For example, we have told like 3 containers has to run. So that 3 containers, the task should be assigned to the worker node should be taken care whatever we have defined in the declarative model of the manifest file. So what Kubernetes will do, once it will return the manifest file, once it has taken the Kubernetes, it will inspect our manifest file. It will just read the manifest file, and first it will store it on the cluster store. This cluster store we call it as a etcd. So the whatever the cluster state and defined, whatever we defined in the YAML file, everything will be stored in the cluster store. Now it is the job of Kubernetes to run the task whatever we mentioned in the YAML file. It will run the task, and there will be scheduler will be there in the Kubernetes cluster. That scheduler, it will assign tasks to the worker nodes. Four controllers or 4 containers has to be run if we define. So here example you can see 3 replicas I am telling, like 3 containers it should run. So it will assign task to the worker nodes. It will run the job. So what Kubernetes also will do, based upon the port numbers and the network conditions defined in the YAML file, it will run your application. So user will browse the application. So now what is the desired state? So whatever we defined in the YAML file, that is a desired state. For example, I am telling the 10 containers has to be run inside the Kubernetes. So that is a desired state. Declarative model. I am declaring the 10 containers I need. But for example, if the 10 containers are not running, so there is maybe only 8 containers are running. So what it will do, Kubernetes, it will assign tasks to the controllers. The controllers, it will take in the background, the controllers will be running. That it will observe the desired state is 10 containers defined in the YAML file, but the actual state is 8 containers. So next what happens, both are not equal. The desired state of desired state of the manifest file is 10, which is stored already in the cluster store, which is not equal to the actual state. Only 8 containers are running inside the worker nodes. So what happens, controllers run the background and constantly monitors the jobs, the task. So how the containers will be running inside the worker node? Again, in the previous session we have seen there will be CTL that it will be installed in each worker node. The each worker node, when it is installed, that will it will pull the image from the Docker hub, whatever you already moved, that image it will be pulled, and based upon the declarative model, it will just run the task. When the task is once the task is assigned to the worker node from the scheduler, it will just run that job. So controllers run background and constantly monitor the state of the cluster. If both are not equal, it is desired is 10 and actual is 8, it will spin off 2 more containers and it will make desired and actual always equal. It will make sure, Kubernetes will make sure the desired and actual state. Kubernetes in the sense controllers, as the controllers are running background, it will make sure desired state and actual state always it will be equal. That means your containers will not be go down. So continuously it will monitor. So Kubernetes will take care. So here, as we are telling, it is declarative model. We no need of creation of the huge code not required. How the applications are running inside and how the logs will be logs will be handled. Those things, huge code, we are not required to write in the Kubernetes. That is the beauty of Kubernetes. So that's all about declarative model and desired state and actual state of the Kubernetes. If you have any questions, feel free to post it in the comment section. Thank you.